The Forgotten Patient. The Willowbrook Asylum stood at the edge of town, a hulking structure of grey stone and iron gates, its windows dark and unyielding. It was a place where the world sent those it wished to forget, a sanctuary for the broken and the lost. But within its walls, there was one patient who even the asylum itself seemed to have forgotten. Her name was never recorded. Her face was never photographed. Yet she existed, a shadow among shadows, a whisper in the corridors. The arrival. No one could recall when she first arrived. The staff, when questioned, would simply shrug and say, "She's always been here." But how could that be? How could a person exist without a name, without a history, without a single thread tying her to the world outside? She was kept in room 13, a small windowless cell at the end of the east wing. The door was always locked. The key kept by Dr. Evelyn Hart, the asylum's head psychiatrist. Dr. Hart was a woman of science, of logic, yet even she could not explain the patient's presence. "She doesn't speak," Dr. Hart would say. "She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep. She simply exists." The whispering corridor. The staff avoided the east wing whenever possible. They claimed the air there was heavier, the silence louder. But sometimes, late at night, the nurses would hear it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against glass. It came from room 13. One night, a young nurse named Clara decided to investigate. She was new, still unaccustomed to the asylum's eerie atmosphere. Armed with a flashlight and a trembling resolve, she made her way to the east wing. The tapping grew louder as she approached room 13. "Hello?" Clara called out, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, only the tapping. She peered through the small window in the door. The room was empty. No, not empty. The patient was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to the door. She was dressed in a white gown, her hair long and unkempt. But what struck Clara was the mirror, a large ornate mirror hanging on the wall. The patient was staring into it, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "What are you looking at?" she whispered. The patient turned. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. But it was her smile that chilled Clara to the bone. It was too wide, too knowing, as if the patient could see into the very depths of her soul. The revelation. The next morning, Clara was gone. Her uniform was found neatly folded on the floor of room 13. But there was no sign of her. The staff searched the asylum from top to bottom, but Clara had vanished without a trace. Dr. Hart, desperate for answers, decided to confront the patient herself. She unlocked the door to room 13 and stepped inside. The patient was sitting on the bed, just as Clara had described. She was staring into the mirror, her expression unreadable. "Who are you?" Dr. Hart demanded. The patient did not respond. "What did you do to Clara?" Still no answer. Frustrated, Dr. Hart grabbed the patient by the shoulders and forced her to turn around. What she saw made her blood run cold. The mirror was empty. It reflected the room, the bed, even Dr. Hart herself, but not the patient. "How?" Dr. Hart stammered. The patient smiled that same too wide smile. "I am the forgotten," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "And soon you will be too. The end or the beginning." Dr. Hart was never seen again. The asylum closed its doors shortly after, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. But if you ever find yourself near Willowbrook, listen closely. You might hear it, a soft rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against glass. And if you're brave enough to follow the sound, you might just find room 13. But be warned, once you enter, you may never leave, because the forgotten are always hungry, and they are always watching.